Hello and welcome to FortiGuard Live. I'm Derek Manky, and joining me today, we're bringing in Glenn Maiden, all the way from Australia, part of our FortiGuard Labs crew, championing the Australia and New Zealand region. We have a lot of breadth and depth in FortiGuard Labs. We truly are worldwide, and it's great to speak to you. How you doing, Glenn?
Very well, Derek. It's great to be here once again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, today I wanted to talk about not just threat intelligence, right? Threat intelligence is a big buzzword people throw around, just like artificial intelligence. But what a lot of people I don't think realize is all the work that we put in behind the scenes in FortiGuard Labs is not just about speeds and feeds, but really about how this has evolved and a lot of the active work that we're doing in the industry, including in Australia on regional levels in the private sector, the public sector, and also globally in some alliances and organizations that we're working with. And I think if we take a step back and look at about just the topic of threat intelligence, if we look where we were 10 years ago, it was very much the speeds and feeds. Certainly, 10, 15 years ago, right? I'll give you a whole bunch of data, do something with it. But really what we're doing today, it's not about that, right? And I think you're seeing this also on the ground in Australia. It's much more of a people thing now, especially from FortiGuard Labs, right? It's a lot more involved. It's a lot more putting the skin in the game and really, innovating, I would say, and doing it the right way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think one of the biggest constraints that we've got is the lack of sort of trained people and the lack of people that can actually go through 7,000 false positives. So it's really about now trying to get that context and setting up, as you say, setting up those really good trusted relationships. So when one of our partners or one of our customers sees something that doesn't look quite right, they know that they can get onto an email to me and just say, hey, this is not working. And then one of the great things is obviously being here in Australia, I've also got that horsepower of the back end FortiGuard Labs team. So if it's something that I can't help with, I can ring up one of our global experts. Are we just seeing this in Australia, or are we seeing this worldwide? What's going on?
Yeah, that's a great point, Glenn. So if we look at, I know we've talked about this a lot before. I think people are quite well aware of a lot of the industry efforts that we've been involved in historically, right? Cyber Threat Alliance is a great example, which we co-founded in 2014. We are, a research sponsor of the MITRE Ingenuity, the Center for Threat Informed Defense. We work globally with Interpol and the Gateway Project. So that's about how we work with law enforcement to do disruption and all that sort of stuff. And that's great, and that's what we've been building over the years. But I love to see how you just mentioned this. It trickles down also to the regional views that we have, right? So, I mean, this is showcased in our threat landscape report that we issue biannually now at FortiGuard Labs. You can see a lot of that data, including data that we have on a sector level, on a regional level in Australia and New Zealand. And that's certainly useful for us to report on when it comes to, report time for a threat landscape report. But we also operationalize that. I know you've been involved in that, right, Glenn? If we talk about locally at the private sector, we share with some strategic partners there too.
Yeah. So, I mean, threat sharing, it's funny. So it's not for not for everyone, at least sort of in terms of going very, very deep. I mean, we need to have a partner that's, got the resources and the technology and the systems in place and the people that can understand it that we can work with. But certainly with customers like, the big end of town, the telecommunications providers, some elements of academia, some elements in the financial services. What I've actually seen in terms of getting some of these partnerships working is we start off just sort of sharing some threat data, and in some cases quite informally. It might just be, hey, we're about to do a threat signal on this particular campaign. This might be of use to you. So it might be just something informally that we pass off in a bit of an ad hoc manner. But those sort of relationships, it's amazing where they go to. So, here in Australia, we've got a whole bunch of critical infrastructure legislation. There's a real focus on trying to get us more resilient in terms of national critical infrastructure, and we've seen things like Colonial Pipeline overseas in the US that have got us a bit concerned. So it's those threat sharing relationships now have evolved to such a good point that some of these leadership, some of these leaders in the telecommunications industry, for example, will ring me up and just say, hey, the legislation says we need to do this. How do I approach that? So, not even just from a threat, more beyond it. So, how do we actually come and how do we approach this challenge, and how do we approach this threat to get the best resolution?
Yeah, resolution and action. I think that's a key word we always talk about. actionable threat intelligence. And I think in order to be able to close that loop, you need the people. I mean, this is very much a people conversation. I know that with all of our strategic partners in Australia, you know them, you've met them. This is like a personal relationship, right? I mean, that was professional, but you go and meet them personally. And that's a big thing, because it's about building trust. That's something else I find even globally when we work in these organizations. But I know that it's about really building those networks with the local partnerships that you're involved in. And I think there's also a difference, right, in terms of what is useful to each stakeholder. Because if we talk about the private sector, i.e. healthcare or telecommunications, we have data on that from FortiGuard Labs, and we can share that data versus something that would share in the public sector, like with the CERT, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, the CERT's a really good example as well. So obviously, I've been working with sort of some of the local CERTs here,
Yep.
and I think that element of trust that you mentioned is critical, because there's organisations like Fortinet where we're so broad in terms of the reach that we've got and the telemetry we've got on almost every view into the threat environment. So it's actually a really, really unique insight. So it takes knowing that you've got that as something that you can bring to the table, but then, as you say, building up that trust and that interpersonal relationship where people know that you're actually in there with a little bit of altruism behind it. All we want to do is see that national level of resilience raised. And the best example that I had here was sort of working with our local Australian Cybersecurity Centre last year. And, we talk about global versus local threats. So we had a threat campaign here that was called Copy Paste. And it was a APT, nation state actor that was attacking a whole bunch of government and large private sector organisations. So, before that was even made public, we were sharing sort of some of those TLP green and TLP amber indicators of compromise. We were sharing hash files of some of the web shells that were being used, bad domains, bad IPs. We had all those, or at least I took all those and then worked with the back-end FortiGuard people. So we had all those protections into our systems and blocking. So anyone that was running a FortiGate or any of our partners and customers were already protected before they even knew it was a problem. So that's where this becomes so powerful.
Yeah, and what you're talking about here is trusted sharing, right? So early sharing as well. It's like an early warning system, isn't it? Just like we got in, when we look at forecasting for threats for hurricane or adverse weather, whatnot. We're actually really doing the same thing on threat intelligence, and it's that's a great example. There's also, I think, if you look at the Cyber Threat Alliance as an example, we just hit a milestone in that recently. We hit 200 early shares for the first time within the Cyber Threat Alliance. So all the members of the CTA, as an example, are sharing data before a blog will go live with indicators of compromise, all those things, so that protections can be in place ahead of time before the bad guys get wind of that, right? It's really leveling the playing field on threat intelligence, and that's within the CTA. But I think it's important to realize that this also happens on a one-to-one basis, especially when we start talking about national CERT, CSERT teams within different sectors and organizations. And as I said, in my experience, everyone has a different use case for this. Like naturally, the CERTs usually are looking at those APTs in the nation states and botnets and infrastructure that are effective in the regions, versus telecommunication providers that are interested more in the infrastructure piece, right? But I think what's really cool is within FortiGuard Labs, we have, like you said, we have that breadth and depth in terms of the data. We can tag things by vertical, and we can actually, play on both the private and the public sector, right?
Yeah, and what I like too, though, is there's so much goodwill in terms of the community. So, there's a lot of people that are, partners, or in a lot of cases, even some of our competitors. Yeah. But there's that knowledge that by sharing, we become more than the sum of our parts. So, we're able to share in good faith, and that makes all of our industry and our customers and partners more resilient, and we all sort of float to the top. So on the rise of the tide. So that's the really, really good part for me.
Yeah, me too. I have a lot of passion for this. I know we share the same passion, but if you look at what we've done historically in the industry with FortiGuard Labs, and it wasn't just us, but we helped to pioneer a lot of these efforts. And really, it's been changing the game, right? So just talking about those early shares, if we look at what we did with the Cyber Threat Alliance, competitors would not share information in the past. That was just what happened in the industry. But if you look at today, as you're mentioning, even with competitors, but certainly strategic partners, we can share things that are about attackers, right? Because we can't just win this war alone. And it's really about that true sharing and collaboration and implementation to make it a stronger kill chain, right? When it comes to, it's actually a form of disruption itself, isn't it?
It is. It's funny when you think about the, the attacker, the threat ecosystem. All the bad guys are working together. It's good to see us starting to, all the good guys starting to work together as well and share information. It's exactly what our adversaries are doing.
Well, strength in numbers, and it sends a message back too. I think that's something that I actually believe is a critical piece, right? Without that collaboration, without that actionable intelligence and the sharing that happens, we're just letting them run wild, like the attackers, right? And especially getting back to what we first started talking about, that cyber criminals move with agility and speed. They're weaponizing automation. They're weaponizing even machine learning and artificial intelligence. They're getting into systems quicker. They have no jurisdictions, right? Cybercrime has no borders, but regions do. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit, Glenn. What are we doing to help break down some of those barriers, borders, I would say?
Oh, look, I think from a regional perspective, it's I think there's a lot of goodwill. So I know certainly our Australian Cybersecurity Centre is looking at how they can sort of be a hub for threat intelligence and how they can work with all the industry verticals. So they're talking to people like myself on how we can actually better share information. Now, I think from a regional perspective, I guess public-private, there's always going to be a few impediments there in terms of how to operate, and also a few challenges to overcome, whether it's legal or whether it's policy or whether it's something else. But what I have always seen is that real goodwill. Like, people want to interoperate, they want to collaborate. A lot of the time it just comes down to how. So I think it's definitely not where I'd like it to be, but it's getting there.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of work to be done still, but that's kind of the fun part about this too, is that I totally agree. There's a lot of goodwill, a good spirit. It's a great community, as it were, right? If you putting a bunch of smart people in a room, which is always a great thing. And no one said this was going to be easy, right? This is why we've been working on this for over 10 years. Like, there's literally been over 10 years of this historical development that we've done between private sector, national cert, between organizations like Cyber Threat Alliance as an example, and most recently, I mentioned MITRE Ingenuity, the Center for Threat Informed Defense. So that's actually creating the frameworks and protocols and technology, how we share that information and make it actionable, because there is that skills gap out there that we know about, right? But there's also the most recently, a lot of the efforts, and I know you've been involved in this as well, Glenn, with the World Economic Forum, right? So this is truly a global stage now. And what's really cool about, as a founding member, of the Center for Cybersecurity within the World Economic Forum, we have the Partnership Against Cybercrime project, right? And this has been two years in the making now, and it's really about connecting the dots on everything we've just been talking about, right? Yes, you have Australia and New Zealand, and you have these, regional private sectors and tech sector. You have the regional public sector and law enforcement and all of that. But then you also have this at a global stage, because there are those borders, and there's a lot of challenges that come having those borders in place. And so therein lies the quest, right, to try to break down those those barriers, to solve those challenges. Even though there's a lot of goodwill, it's not going to be done overnight. And I think the Partnership Against Cybercrime is a really interesting aspect how we're approaching that.
Yeah, actually, it's one of the most exciting projects I've been involved in for a long time, actually. So again, we talked about goodwill before, and we talked about sort of the scarcity of cyber talent. And it's a bit of a unicorn, a really, really good, experienced cyber threat intelligence analyst. There's not too many of them, but obviously, with yourself and the World Economic Forum and the Cyber Threat Alliance, sort of coming up with some of these really, really powerful initiatives. What I've loved is we've gone and worked with some of the the biggest and best organizations in the world. So we've pulled together the biggest and the best. And not only that, we've pulled out the best of the best in terms of who's their best cyber threat analyst. We've pulled together in a group to go through and say, well, what can we actually do together? You know, how can we actually get a bunch of really, really powerful expert people sitting in the same virtual room, obviously at the moment, sitting in the same virtual room, and really make a dent in terms of how we're approaching cybercrime. And while it's early days, we're seeing some very, very positive early results already.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's very exciting. That, to me, this is another one of those. I have good feelers about this. Right, this is another one of those pioneering moments, I think, in the industry. Right, it's about, again, bringing. This is a multi-stakeholder effort, not just private sector, but public sector as well. And I think more importantly, it's not just the goodwill, but the actual people rolling up their sleeves, right? Saying that it's, you know, yes, there's interest, but let's do something about this, right? Collectively, because as we know, cybercrime being a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and every day we report on ransomware, the problem is just going to get worse if we don't address it. And I know within the partnership, we've launched recently Atlas as well. So there's a project ongoing to actually map the cyber criminal ecosystem as well. Because you got to understand that it's not just about, yeah, we know there's ransomware out there and infrastructure, but we also know that these are businesses on their own, and we need to understand more about the business model itself, right?
Yeah, and again, it comes back to that partnership element that we discussed before. So there is so much really, really good intelligence out there, even just in open source, on the activities and the stakeholders and the tactics, techniques, and procedures of a lot of these organizations, but they're scattered all over the place. So, you know, even just in and of itself, pulling that together and normalizing that information, it's amazing how much intelligence is there if we've got the right people together that are able to interpret it and then normalize it. So, yeah, we're sitting on some really, really good opportunities coming into 2022.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really exciting. It's fantastic context, because now you're marrying context from the private sector and the public sector together. And that really is the key, right? I think that is the key to effective strategy and disruption too. So really excited about that. Thanks for supporting those efforts and supporting us with FortiGuard Labs locally, regionally, I should say, in Australia and New Zealand. Glenn, it's fantastic to have you on board. And I know you're busy at work on that on a daily basis. It's been a great conversation. You can check out more on all the updates, what we're doing with our latest research, and everything that we're doing on the alliances and organizations and threat sharing at blog.fortinet.com. Thanks again for watching. This is Derek Manky with FortiGuard Live.